They called her a myth, a name whispered in special operations, never on paper, never confirmed. No one had ever seen her. No unit ever claimed her. But when a full Delta Force team collapsed without a single shot, fired command finally asked one question. Was the ghost real? This is the story of a female operative who rewrote every rule, exposed a hardened commander, and ended the mission in seconds. If this kind of story speaks to you, you're welcome to subscribe. Quietly, when you're ready. Commander Mason Thorne had built his entire career on control-structured missions, dependable units, and predictable outcomes. He wasn't flashy, he was effective. His reputation within Special Operations Command was solid, even revered. When assigned to lead a critical full-spectrum urban warfare exercise at Fort Sentinel, a mock city built from a decommissioned NATO airfield, Thorne felt confident. This wasn't a real mission, it was training, controlled variables, simulated threats. But this time, the opposing force was a wild card. He was told the OPFOR would consist of one operative only. No team, no drones, no support, just a single individual with full freedom to disrupt, dismantle, and disable his defense. Thorne raised an eyebrow at the briefing. So, it's a game of hide and seek. The colonel didn't answer. Whispers among the staff used a single word, ghost. Some said it was a code name, others claimed it was a warning. But to Thorne, it was nonsense. My men will lock this down in an hour, he muttered. He had no idea that the myth he'd dismissed would soon walk straight through his perfect defenses without a sound. The operation began at 200 hours under full moonlight. Thorne's team, Delta Group Echo, spread across the mock city in precise formations. Thermal sensors buzzed alive. Perimeter drones hummed overhead. Entry points were secured, Overwatch snipers positioned, and roaming squads rotated on a strict 15-minute patrol schedule. It looked perfect on paper. It always did. Inside the command center, housed in what used to be a control tower, Thorne monitored live feeds. Confident. His lead sergeant, Matthew Kerr, leaned over a console. Perimeter shows clear. No motion past checkpoint 6. Good. Thorne replied, We'll log this as a containment success in 6 hours. But 2 blocks away, something was already wrong. Alpha Squad Southern Patrol paused outside Building 9, an abandoned mock grocery store used for training civilians in place. One of the soldiers, Corporal Owen Reyes, froze. Where's my NV, he whispered, patting his vest. His night vision goggles clipped to his front harness moments ago were gone. He didn't drop them. He didn't hear them fall. Behind him, Sergeant Willow Harper noticed something else. A flare stick standard issue had been wedged into the chain link fence they passed 10 minutes earlier, not just left behind, placed deliberately. No alarms, no visuals on thermal, no sign of breach. Commander, this is Harper. We might have been shadowed, quietly. We'll sweep the sector, she reported. Thorne's response was dismissive. Noted. But unless you see a body, focus on your route. We're running live protocol, not ghost stories. She didn't argue, but she did tighten her grip on the rifle. At 0250 hours, the first drone feed went dead. No static, just black. Then another, and another. Thorne's tech officer looked up. Looks like targeted disruption, not a system failure. Someone's taking out our birds one at a time. Thorne's jaw tightened. We trained against electronic warfare, reroute from the fixed cams. But 3 of the fixed cams had been tampered with too. The lens angles had changed just slightly, enough to turn blind corners into shadowed corridors. The shift was subtle, unsettling. By OR 310, Beta Team was missing. No radio contact, no movement, no distress signal. They'd vanished within an empty apartment block designated for non-combatant shelter operations. A drone sweep, one of the few remaining, finally caught something. Movement, a silhouette crossing a 3rd-floor window. Too small to be a man in full gear, too quiet for a team. A flash of light, then nothing. The feed cut. Inside the tower, Thorne felt it not panic, but pressure. This isn't improvisation, he muttered. It's choreography. Someone was studying them and using their own procedures against them. Sergeant Kerr nodded grimly. Sir, whoever's doing this, They've run this operation already. Probably more than once. Thorne turned to the map. He began to replay routes, overlapping timers, sensor sweeps, movement logs. It was all there. All predictable. She's ahead of us, he finally admitted. Meanwhile, in Sector F, another pattern was unfolding. Layla Ghost Carter moved silently through the shadows of the drainage tunnels below the city. No tech, no backup, just instinct, timing, and discipline. She'd already bypassed 9 tripwires, disabled 2 motion detectors, and placed decoy noise emitters near the old vehicle depot timed to activate in 15 minutes. Her goal wasn't just to win the simulation. It was to teach Thorne a lesson his manuals could never offer. She left behind 0 footprints but did leave evidence. Small signs designed to be noticed, not hidden. A ration bar deliberately removed from a soldier's pack, a pressure plate triggered just enough to alert but not explode, a comms mic removed from a helmet and pinned to a training dummy. They weren't threats, they were signatures. Each one said, "I'm already here. I've seen your playbook." At Ardo 3:30, Thorne stood alone in the tower, watching another red X appear on the command screen, one more operator eliminated. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. Each strike was timed between their own system checks. Each takedown happened 5 minutes before anyone noticed. The exercise was falling apart, and Ghost was nowhere to be found. Only traces, only silence, only reminders that his doctrine was being used as a weapon against him. By Oro 340, 2/3 of the defense grid had been rendered neutralized, without a single gunfight, without a single verbal exchange. It was no longer about beating a myth, it was about survival of relevance. Thorne's command style rigid, rehearsed, was collapsing under something terrifying. Unpredictability, and all across the darkened cityscape, every soldier still standing began to ask the same question. How do you fight someone who doesn't follow rules, but understands all of yours? By 0345 hours, the simulation was unraveling. Inside the command tower, Mason Thorne stared at the board. Red tags outnumbered green. Entire squads had been neutralized, most without firing a shot. No visual, no confirmed contact, just a growing void. One of his last mobile units, Delta 4, moved through the northern block, an industrial maze of mock warehouses and shipping containers. Sergeant Leo McKay led the team. He was sharp, reliable, not easily rattled. "Maintain radio silence unless engaged," he whispered to his men. "We sweep east to west, secure building 12A, then." A sudden metallic clang cut him off. They turned. Nothing. Then movement, a shadow crossing a doorway, silent, fast. "Contact maybe," McKay said, raising his rifle. But before he could call it in, the lights in the warehouse flickered, then shut off completely. Darkness. A hiss, not a grenade, compressed air. A smoke capsule rolled across the floor training grade, but disorienting nonetheless. They switched to thermal. Too late. The first man dropped, tagged with red chalk at the throat and shoulder, a perfect kill mark in simulation rules. Then a second, no sound, no scuffle. Just elimination. Thorne watched the tracker feed as Delta 4's green signals went dark one by one. He grabbed the radio. "McKay, status, report." Static, then a single word. "She's here." Somewhere beneath the warehouse, Layla Carter was already gone. She'd moved through the substructure with surgical timing, bypassing every known entry. She mapped vent systems during the pre-briefing. She had no support, no real-time intel, just memory, pattern, and instinct. She had entered through a ventilation shaft 12 minutes before Delta 4 arrived. And she knew exactly how long it would take them to reach the upper floor, how long to react, how long before fear settled in. In the tower, Thorne's composure began to shift. He wasn't yelling, he never yelled, but his eyes moved faster now, scanning, recalculating. He ordered fallback positions, shift remaining units to perimeter defense, lock down central routes. But Carter wasn't aiming for the perimeter. She was already inside the command zone. At 0352 hours, the east stairwell camera showed something strange. A guard at the base, Private Nolan, stood alone. Behind him, a door was ajar. He turned, puzzled, took a step, then stopped. A flash of red chalk marked across his chest. The feed blinked out. Seconds later, the tower's interior lights dimmed just for a moment. When they came back, 2 entry points had tripped. Thorne's operations officer stood up. "Sir, we've been breached." "Location?" "Here." What followed was not chaos, it was too precise for that. Layla moved through the tower like a scalpel, not a hammer. Every action had purpose. She disabled radios, only select ones, placed decoy noises in corridors just enough to misdirect, marked 2 operators with simulated hits, left the third untouched but staring directly at her as she disappeared down a maintenance shaft. The message was clear. "I can eliminate you. I chose not to." Thorne retreated to the secure room. Only 3 officers remained. The sound of movement measured, deliberate echoed above them. His thoughts raced. How had she bypassed every layer? Why hadn't any countermeasure worked? Because she didn't fight the system. She used it. Every drone sweep, every rotation timer, every fallback plan. She studied it all. She turned his control into her opportunity. At Euro 358, a device landed outside the secure room. Not a charge, a speaker. It played back Thorne's own voice from a briefing 48 hours earlier. "Our ghost won't even make it past the outer wall." Then silence. Then a soft tap on the door. Simulation protocol. She'd completed the breach. They were, by all standards, dead. "Yo, 3 fine hours." The mission clock ticked over. The feed went dark. At exactly Oro 4 and the exercise ended. Layla Carter was already walking out of the compound. No cheers, no music, just her shadow fading into the morning light. Inside, Thorne stood still, head bowed. He hadn't lost to force. He'd lost to restraint, patience, and perception. Everything he prided himself on, she had done better. And faster. The mission hadn't ended in chaos, it had ended in seconds. The room was quiet now. The simulation had ended. The data feeds were cut, but the weight of failure hung in the air like smoke after detonation. Commander Mason Thorne remained seated in the command bunker, elbows on knees, fingers laced beneath his chin. No one spoke. Outside, some of the younger operators were removing their chalk-stained vests. Others walked in silence, shaken not from injury, but from realization. It wasn't the loss that rattled them. It was how they lost. No alarms, no firefight, no heroics, just methodical erasure. Colonel Ramsey entered the room a few minutes later, holding a single-page report. "Red Team has confirmed complete mission success," he said flatly. "No casualties. 0 compromise." Thorne didn't look up. Ramsey stepped closer. She submitted her debrief already. Single sentence. Thorne waited. Ramsey read it aloud. "Doctrine failed, discipline didn't." That was all. Thorne leaned back in his chair. He wasn't angry, not anymore. What he felt now was harder to name, something between respect and regret. He had built a career on precision, believed in hierarchy, repetition, tight formations, but none of that had mattered in the last 2 hours. What Layla Carter had done wasn't magic. It was military art stripped to its purest form. Observe, adapt, exploit. And in doing so, she'd exposed him. Not just his defense grid, his assumptions, his rigidity, his belief that unpredictability was a flaw to be corrected, not a threat to be prepared for. The next morning, the official review began. A joint panel of observers, senior instructors, and command-level strategists sat in a closed briefing room. Thorne stood before them, alone. Not to defend, to explain. He didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't hack our systems. She didn't overpower our soldiers. She used our structure against us. He gestured to the tactical overview behind him. You can trace every breach, every takedown, back to a predictable rotation, a routine patrol, a camera blind spot we'd logged weeks ago. Everything she used came from us. Silence. Then one of the panelists asked the question no one wanted to voice. "Do you believe her actions were unrealistic?" Thorne paused. "No, I believe they were inevitable." In the weeks that followed, the footage was reviewed by special ops instructors across all major branches. Clips of Layla slipping undetected past live sensors, the moment she entered the tower's outer perimeter without triggering a single alert, her choice not to kill one of the tower officers, but to mark him and let him live deliberately to carry the message. You're not the target. The system is... Within Delta circles, the aftermath wasn't loud. No press releases, no promotions. But things changed. Briefings became less confident. Simulations added new variables. Commanders stopped laughing at rumors. And a single name began appearing in unofficial training documents, Ghost not in red ink or bold font, just a quiet reminder. A placeholder for an unknown threat that thinks faster than your doctrine allows. As for Thorne, he requested reassignment from Field Command, not as punishment, as choice. He began working in tactical development, rewriting scenario structures, reevaluating training logic. He started asking different questions. Not what's the threat's capability, but what are we doing that lets them see us coming? He brought in instructors from irregular warfare backgrounds. He pushed for asymmetric warfare modules in every team's cycle. He quoted Layla's one-sentence report often. Doctrine failed, discipline didn't. He never mentioned her name again. Never used Ghost in conversation, but every now and then, when he walked the perimeter of a training ground and saw a squad moving too predictably, he'd pause, then ask a simple question. What would she do right now? That always changed the tone of the room. What Layla Carter had dismantled wasn't just a mission, it was a mindset, a belief that control is enough. She didn't need noise to make her point, no glory, no aggression, just accuracy, patience, and a kind of discipline that doesn't wait for orders, it anticipates failure before it happens. In the end, Thorne wasn't humiliated. He was educated. And that, perhaps, was her real mission all along. It started quietly. A month after the exercise ended, a new syllabus appeared inside Fort Sentinel's Tactical Doctrine Development Division. No announcements, no press, just an internal memo. Phase 4 red cell integration, non-linear opposition simulations. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Rotations became randomized. Drone surveillance patterns were no longer cyclical. Standard patrols were required to simulate ghost incursions where no visible threat existed, only subtle signs of infiltration. At the bottom of every new protocol was a simple citation, Red Team, or FRA. No name, no face, just an acknowledgement of what had happened. Across the country, other bases followed. Instructors at Fort Bragg began referencing opposition profiles built around psychological disruption, not firepower. Naval Special Warfare began integrating single-opponent escalation models in close-quarters training. Even the Air Force, typically far from ground-level doctrine, sent an internal request for a debrief. Everyone wanted to understand how a single operator, without drones, without support, without even a gunfight, had taken down a fully equipped Delta force in minutes. And the more they studied the footage, the more they understood. This wasn't just tactics, it was thinking. Meanwhile, Layla Carter had disappeared again. Not in a dramatic sense. She wasn't a ghost in the wind. She was simply absent. No commendations, no follow-up missions logged, no debriefs leaked. Some say she requested a transfer to Deep Recon. Others believed she was embedded as an instructor somewhere without a title. But for most, it didn't matter where she went. What mattered was what she left behind, doubt in all the right places, opportunity in the hands of those who'd failed. Mason Thorne embraced that doubt. 6 weeks post-simulation, he led a small roundtable of career officers in a war-gamed planning session. The scenario was simple urban rescue, multi-tiered threat, high unpredictability. Thorne listened as younger commanders mapped their assault, laid out grid formations, timed their sweeps. Then he asked them, "How do you account for someone smarter than you?" They paused. Someone who watches longer than you prepare, who doesn't care about territory, but about tempo. One officer replied, "We control the field. We'll force the pace." Thorne shook his head. "You won't get that chance." Then he placed a red folder on the table. Inside were 6 photos, screenshots from the Ghost simulation. A pressure plate marked but unused, a comms wire tied in a silent knot, a chalk X drawn upside down, visible only from above. "I didn't lose because she broke protocol," he said. "I lost because I assumed she wouldn't." Thorne's quiet advocacy led to deeper change. Doctrine officers began inviting non-traditional thinkers to contribute to planning models. They studied not only victories, but simulations where entire units were disrupted without visual contact. Layla's method became a ghost template. Instructors ran Carter profiles on exercises black box scenarios with no map, no brief, only a set of subtle triggers meant to collapse command assumptions. Those who succeeded didn't always win by brute force. They won by slowing down, by watching, by letting the opponent move first, then using that movement against them. Outside of military circles, her story never broke public. There was no Netflix documentary, no podcast, no leak. Only silence, professional, intentional. But inside operations schools, whispers persisted. Operators who trained under Phase 4 quietly asked, "Is this a ghost module?" Instructors never confirmed. They didn't need to. Because every time a trainee missed a silent marker, every time someone reacted too quickly to a false alarm, or failed to notice their own gear had been shifted 2 inches, they learned the same lesson: you are never as in control as you think. And yet, that lesson didn't create fear. It created focus. Operators began logging more time studying shadows, not just targets. They started leaving one member off pattern during sweeps, someone whose only job was to notice what no one else was watching. Briefings became quieter, smaller words, fewer assumptions. In a way, Layla's disappearance was her final tactic. By removing herself from the system, she let it absorb the shock, adapt, rebuild. No victory parade, no public speech, just change. Slow, intentional, lasting. It wasn't until months later that Thorne received a single envelope. No return address, no insignia. Inside was a folded page. A training schedule, a target site marked for test breach, and 4 words. "Try again, this time." He smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because he expected to win, but because he finally understood precision isn't about control. It's about respecting the unknown and letting that respect guide the way you move before someone else moves better. 3 months after the ghost incident, Commander Mason Thorne returned to the field. It wasn't expected. Even he didn't plan it. But a sudden vacancy opened at a multinational joint training op in Nevada, one of the most complex urban simulations run on U.S. soil. A full brigade-sized exercise with embedded intelligence, live drone feeds, and real-time threat modeling. Thorne was asked to consult. He accepted quietly. This time, he arrived without the old swagger. No long briefings, no heavy-handed planning. He observed, he listened, he stayed out of the spotlight. Some officers wondered if he was just a placeholder there to collect a check and retire with dignity. But Thorne had something to prove, not to them, to himself. On day 3 of the operation, the unexpected happened. A sudden shift in the opposing force's behavior. Routes previously scouted went dark. A drone sweep lost 2 visual units. No shots fired, no contact. Thorne raised his head. "This isn't part of the red team plan," one analyst said. "We programmed their movement. They're out of position." Thorne reviewed the logs. Something was off. The movements were too clean, too efficient. They weren't random. They were calculated. He opened the camera feeds again, looked closer. A chalk mark on a stairwell. A missing comm tag from a helmet in Sector 5. A heat signature that hovered but never moved. It was happening again. He turned to the operations coordinator. "Shut down routes Echo and Foxtrot. Pull all units from Building 7. "But there's no confirmed threat," the officer replied. Thorne stared. "There's no confirmed anything that's your threat." The coordinator hesitated, then followed the order. 2 minutes later, the lights in Building 7 went out. 3 sensor alerts triggered in perfect sequence. Another drone feed went dark. A silent takedown had just been avoided. Barely. By midnight, the entire operation shifted into defensive mode. This wasn't a test anymore. Someone had entered the exercise, but not as part of Red Team, not as a player. As a message, a pattern emerged. Markers, symbols, not identical to Layla's from the previous exercise, but similar. It was her language, adapted. Thorne recognized it immediately. This wasn't sabotage, it was challenge. He walked to the base perimeter alone. past the simulated buildings and sensor rigs, toward the training ground's edge, where a small weather tower stood unused. And there, waiting in the shadow, was a silhouette, leaning calmly against the wall, hands relaxed, eyes alert. She stepped forward, face revealed under low red light. Layla Carter. No rank, no insignia. She looked exactly the same. Still silent, still precise. Thorne didn't speak at first. Then, without preamble, he said, "You trained someone. They're using your playbook." She nodded once. Not trained, tested. A pause. And they're slipping. Layla explained in fragments. She always did. Someone inside Red Team had acquired her old simulation data, copied her movements, her methods, but lacked the discipline. Too confident, too fast, too loud. She hadn't come to destroy the exercise. She'd come to reset the scale. If they think they can copy a ghost, she said, then they've never understood what it takes to disappear. Thorne understood. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about legacy. Someone was building tactics without understanding the principle behind them. And now, real units were being misled by false confidence. That night, Thorne re-entered the command tent and initiated a manual override. He pulled one squad off simulation and replaced them with 3 instructors, rewrote patrol paths, reversed surveillance timing. Every change he made was unpredictable. And when the rogue ghost mimic moved in for what should have been a flawless breach, he walked straight into a silent ambush. No fanfare, no alarms. Just a single red tag placed on his back as he froze in confusion. Not from Layla. From Thorne. The test ended 10 minutes early. Once again, without a single shot fired. This time, though, it wasn't Layla who ended the mission. It was the man who'd once underestimated her. After the op, Thorne walked alone to the southern fence line. Layla was gone. But left behind was a folded note, pinned to the fence with a knife. Precision is earned, not copied. And below it, "You're learning." That was the last time he ever saw her. But the mark she left now carried forward through him. He began writing new doctrine modules under the codename Gray Cell Tactics that didn't rely on dominance, but on adaptation. And unlike before, he didn't base them on old habits. He based them on uncertainty, on humility, on one hard lesson burned into his mind. You cannot outgun what you refuse to understand, and you cannot defeat a ghost by becoming one. Months passed. The Nevada incident, never formally reported, faded into classified logs and internal updates. No one outside the chain of command ever knew a second ghost had emerged or been stopped. But inside certain circles where operations blur between simulation and shadow, the story remained alive. Not in headlines, not in awards, but in change. Thorne's name reappeared quietly in advisory rosters. He wasn't lecturing. He wasn't teaching. He was listening, reviewing training programs across branches, watching for signs that teams were adapting not just their tactics, but their thinking. He saw signs of progress. Operators checking blind angles twice, briefings that included phrases like, "assume a smarter enemy," simulations that gave red teams complete autonomy not to win, but to disrupt assumptions. What Layla Carter had sparked was no longer about her. She was never meant to be followed. She was meant to remind them of something they had forgotten. That dominance without adaptability is a weakness. That precision must be earned through understanding, not mimicry. That real strength isn't loud, it's patient, it's unseen. At Fort Sentinel, a new building opened on the southern end of the training complex. It wasn't a monument. There was no statue, no ceremonial name. But inside, the halls were filled with case studies of unconventional operations, missions that succeeded not through power, but through unpredictability and discipline. At the end of the hallway, a small plaque was mounted, no name, just 5 words. Observe, adapt, exploit, then vanish. Below it, a symbol barely noticeable. 2 intersecting chalk lines, one vertical, one diagonal. Operators call it the ghost mark. No one claims to know its origin, but everyone knows what it means. Thorne visited the building only once. He walked slowly through each room, paused at the planning table where his failure had once been reenacted in simulation. He didn't smile, didn't mourn. He simply stood there quiet, respectful before leaving the way he came. He never returned. Elsewhere, the legacy spread. Instructors began using a simple exercise, assign one trainee as the invisible hand, no brief, no tools, just presence. The rest must continue as normal until they realize something is wrong. The exercise rarely ends with gunfire. It ends with silence, realization, correction. Those who fail are frustrated. Those who succeed don't celebrate. They just nod and ask when they can run it again. Whispers of Layla Carter's legend continued. Instructors used her as a caution, a ghost of methodology, not mystery. Young soldiers asked, "Did she really take down an entire Delta group alone?" The veterans answered the same way every time. She didn't take them down. She let them take themselves apart. And that was the truth. Because she never attacked Thorne's team. She exposed the cracks they already had. She held up a mirror and stepped back. One night, in a secure command center overseas, an instructor pulled up simulation footage from the 400EX file. A new class was watching. At minute 23, Layla appears briefly on a stairwell camera. She looks up, then down, then moves out of frame. The students sat still. Then one raised his hand. Why didn't she engage them? She had the advantage. The instructor didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because sometimes the lesson isn't to fight. It's to force others to think differently about how they fight." And in that space between noise and silence, force and finesse, Layla's legacy lives. Not as a myth, not as a ghost, but as a reminder to never be so sure of your system that you forget how easily it can be rewritten by someone who simply sees it more clearly. There was no ending to her story. No final mission, no official status, just a trail of smarter soldiers, sharper minds, and quieter rooms where her lessons still echo. In the end, she didn't vanish to become a legend. She vanished because that's what discipline demands. And for those who remember her, that's enough. In a world driven by technology, power, and visibility, we often forget that the most effective forces are the ones we don't see. Layla Carter wasn't powerful because she had superior firepower. She was powerful because she was patient, disciplined, and absolutely committed to understanding the system before acting. Her story reminds us that greatness isn't always loud. It's not found in declarations or domination, but in restraint, in clarity, in choosing not to act until the exact right moment. The true strength of a leader or a tactician isn't in their ability to strike. It's in their ability to observe, absorb, and reshape the battlefield without needing recognition. Sometimes, the greatest victory is when your opponent realizes they never even saw you coming. If this story spoke to you, you may want to hear the next. Feel free to subscribe quietly, no rush. And if a thought stayed with you, there's room below to leave it. We'll be here when the next one comes.